Hi, I'm Becca Stendahl, Program Director at MSEF, and I want to introduce my friend Sylvia Scharf, who I've asked to join us here today for a look at some resources that you can share with your students. Sylvia?
Hi, my name is Sylvia Scharf. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I've been working with the Environmental Solutions Initiative at MIT, developing educator guides to go with their award-winning podcast, TIL Climate. Today I learned climate. So the TIL Climate podcast is part of a suite of resources that MIT has for learning about climate change, mostly aimed at the high school through early college level, though a lot of the resources could probably work at the middle school level as well. I just want to give you a quick little overview of what we've got and what might work for you and your students as they're developing their projects. So the MIT Climate Portal includes a whole bunch of articles, resources, and things like that. And especially at that early stage of planning, when you're trying to figure out what your project really is, the MIT explainers are probably going to be a really good resource. These are short 1 to 2 page articles written by scientists and experts in these topics. And you can see there's everything from the urban heat island effect, sea level rise, forests and climate change, and even such sort of more specific engineering topics as cities or concrete. And then we also have this primer. This is called Climate Science Risk and Solutions, and it's an interactive primer on the basics of climate change. It has all these chapters, and each chapter includes places to ask questions, look at real data, and explore. And it's both visual and audio. You can listen to Laura Hesse-Fisher, the host of the podcast, talk about these different topics. And speaking of the podcast, TIL Climate is a short podcast. They're about 10 to 15 minutes long, usually around 12 minutes long. And there's topics on just about everything and more coming out all the time. So we've got carbon capture, nuclear power, energy efficiency, sea level rise, what Americans think about climate change, just a really broad set of topics. And all of these are really aimed at a broad audience, so they should be very understandable. They really tried to cut through the jargon. And my piece of this has been developing educator guides. Now, these educator guides, each one is keyed to a podcast episode, but they also can be used in sort of a piecemeal or sort of a buffet style fashion. They're not necessarily a lesson plan. They have a list of possible activities to do. And what Becca and I have been talking about is that students could actually use some of these activities both to help them as they're developing their project, developing their question, and they could also use some of them to actually get the data they need for their question. One of the roles I've seen for myself in developing these educator guides is to do a little bit of curation of the data available on the internet. So if you have a student who's interested in, for example, electricity, energy efficiency, or carbon capture, or any of these topics, and there are more coming all the time, almost all of these include some kind of data-driven activity, which means there's a curated website with trusted data that a student could use to gather data as part of their project. So for example, if they're interested in the electric grid, there's a great set of data on exactly how electricity moves around our country, how it's generated, the emissions effects of how it's generated, and all of that kind of information already in that guide, easily accessible, with interactive data visualizations from trusted organizations like branches of the government and trusted scientific organizations. So I definitely see those as a really useful possible tool, either in the beginning stages, or in fact, if a student was going to do a data-driven analysis as part of their project.
That's great. I think one of the things that I was so excited about when I saw Sylvia post some of these resources when they were being launched is I was starting to think through that we were entering this phase that was this beginning process for students where they had to come up with ideas, where they had to look at where their background information was coming from and find credible sources. And these are all areas that when we've talked to teachers, and we've talked to students that they struggle with. And so seeing all of this laid out and the way that Sylvia just explained, that it's credible sources, that there's lots of rich data there, there's interesting topics. I also know from conversations that a lot of students are interested in studying climate science and don't know where to start or how to think about it as a science project. And so I think looking through those pieces, there's so much potential there. And I could envision something where a classroom looks at some of this content all together and then generates a bunch of different questions that they could explore further. So I thought
one of my favorite questions in almost all the guides is, what else could you discover using this tool?
Yep.
So I kind of introduce people to a tool and then say, here it is. What else could you do with it?
Yeah. And I think we've heard repeatedly from students that they feel like everything's already been studied. And so there is so much more out there, which is great. And one of the things I also love about this is it's all open access. And so the way that the modules are set up, from what I saw, is you have student information and you have teacher information. And so you could share this with a classroom and the students can dive into it on their own time too. So if they want more information, it doesn't have to all be teacher guided.
Yes, all of the guides are under Common Core. They're under, not Common Core, sorry, though many of them are actually tied to Common Core standards, but they're all under share and share alike Creative Commons license. We expect that people will take these, adapt them, modify them, and link back.
Awesome. So speaking of free access and approach, I want to share some of where I see the Science Fair Ready resources that MSEF has just launched, how those could align. So I'm just going to share the source of some of that information. So again, I will put the link to access this material if you don't already have access, but within the MSEF Science Fair Ready framework, you would want to go into the process framework folder. The observe phase is this initial phase of the process. This is where they're brainstorming and doing background research. But if you go into the worksheets folder, there's a subfolder for brainstorming activities. And these are a bunch of different activities, and we will continue to add more activities to this folder to help students think through their problems. And some of this is using methods where you come up with as many questions as you can, and then you start going through and identifying which are open-ended questions, closed-ended questions. How can you refine your question? How can you think about your question a little bit deeper? And so there's a lot of resources in here that students can explore, and you can download, make copies of any of these and adapt them. They're free and open for use. So that's what we wanted to share. We're really excited to see what could come of this. As we said, climate seems like a really big topic, but there's so much that you could drill down that's a good chunk of information. So I think my question for you, Sylvia, is of the topics that you worked on, which has been your favorite?
Actually, I really enjoyed looking into learning more about how our electric grid works, because I kind of had a general idea, but actually seeing it mapped out was really, really interesting to me. And I really enjoyed engaging with seeing how electricity actually transmits around both within my neighborhood and around the country, and how electricity is sourced. I definitely learned some things I would not have expected in that process. And I think it's always great when, as I'm developing something, I'm learning something new that totally blows my preconceived notions out of the water. So that was really fun.
That's really great. And I think one thing that made me realize as well is that, again, if this is a topic about climate, but there's so many different entryways. And when you think about the project areas, both in middle school and high school that students can explore, there's electrical engineering as one whole topic. So it could be electrical engineering, but still be connected to climate. So I think it would be a fun activity to look at what's a topic or a broad question that you could address, and what are all the different project areas that students could explore with that. So that's really
absolutely, because everything has multiple avenues to connect to it. There's even a history angle there, right?
Yeah.
Why did our electric grid develop the way it did?
Yep. One piece too is as I think about where you could go with this as well is, thinking through a project that has local significance to your community. And while we want students to participate in the science fair, that's why we're here. But it would be great also to think about, if you create a presentation, how else can you get out and share the word to your peers, to your community? Can you share the words with the town, your town or your city? So thinking about the impact you can have is great.
Yeah, definitely thinking about who is the audience who best would benefit from what you're doing, and how can you get to that audience.
Yep. Great. Well, on that note, thank you, Sylvia. We'll put some links to these resources in the comments on here, and it's great. Thank you.
Great.